relations.
Now, I want to start off with a lightning round. You each get 30 seconds to answer exactly that. What is next for the US-China relations? And then we'll open up the debate. Professor Gong Zhang, I'd like to start with you.
Well, the United States was talking about freedom of navigation under international law. The international law it is talking about is actually what's called the United Nations Convention on Law of Seas. But the problem is that the United States was never party to that. It was not a signatory to the United Nations Convention of Law of the law overseas. China is, like the 160-some countries. So the issue here is that whether the freedom of navigation operations by the U.S. Navy is justified in the Taiwan Strait.
Admiral Montgomery, your thoughts?
Well, thank you. First of all, if you ask me the question, would I rather be a country that hasn't signed the international law of the sea but adheres to its principles, like the United States, or a country that has signed the international law of the sea and ignores all its principles, like China? Of course, I'd rather be the United States. Look, this was an unprofessional maneuver. I've done lots of these freedom of navigation operations. This one was really close. The Chinese say they're a big country. They want to be treated like a big country. They have to act like a big country and not like a small country, which they did over the weekend.
And last but not least, Joseph Rosen.
Yeah, so on a broader context, the geostrategic environment in East Asia, I would say that both powers, China and the US, are sending mixed signals to each other. The US is leaving the door open for China for a dialogue, but at the same time, keeps with their phone-up freedom of navigation operations, while China, we can witness a clearer division between the defense apparatus that is more confrontational and the diplomacy circles in China.
Now, gentlemen, I'd like to open up the floor for the debate. I'd like to encourage you to partake, obviously, in friendly conversation, but also making sure your opinions are heard. And the first thing that I want to ask, Admiral, if you wouldn't mind answering, provocation or protection? Where is the US in terms of this narrative?
Listen, I think that the United States operations, these freedom of navigation operations, which are being done at the same rate that they were done, year over year for the last 4 or 5 years, so they're not being stepped up. But the United States, though, is very consistently, and we do this around the world, we do freedom of navigation operations against many countries, including allies, to make sure that we make our statements known. We do them against Canada. We do them against many countries around the world. The idea here is we're demonstrating that there's a principle, an international principle of freedom of navigation through international waterways. And the Taiwan Strait is an international waterway, and that is how the world sees it. Only China sees it as some kind of territorial sea. It doesn't meet any of the definitions of a territorial sea. And as a result, the United States, in doing these, does them very safely. This was, in fact, a bilateral one with HMCS, a Canadian ship, the Montreal. And the Chung Hoon was operating safely, not provocatively, doing a routine transit, no military operations. And the Chinese ship could have caused an accident that kills dozens, if not, scores or hundreds of sailors. This is unprofessional. It is not what a global power is supposed to act like. I fear that China is, starting to get nuclear weapons and other things, and they're not acting like an adult state. They need to do this properly.
And Professor, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to that, but also adding in, it was being touted also, as the Admiral pointed out, as a close call here for the Chinese and American warships, but just how close were we to an actual collision?
No, it's very close, I admit that. But the problem is that, there's no such thing as international waters in a legal sense. The water most likely that's being traveled is what's called exclusive economic zones belonging to China. And there are certain rules and certain navigation models under that rule. Article 58 of the UNCLOS, that's the law I'm talking about, clearly states that states should have due regards for the coastal state for its rights and duties. But the problem is that this law is ignored by the United States. It's cherry picking certain things under this law and ignoring other things. For example, innocent passage proposition. For example, you have to conduct peaceful operations in this region. The idea that the United States is talking about international law at the same time it's not even party to this. It's a travesty in my view. I think this whole idea let me finish. The idea that you conduct this kind of freedom of navigation so close to the China coastal area is a provocation in the eyes of Beijing. Imagine Chinese Navy conduct the same operation right outside of the Chesapeake Bay, for example, or right outside of the San Francisco Bay, and what will United States reaction to be? It's totally unnecessary for so-called freedom of navigation for that purpose. So I think that's the point that Beijing is coming from. It's regarded as a provocation. There's no need for that.
Admiral, I'd like to bring you into the conversation to respond, and then I'd like to bring Joseph into the conversation as well.
Let's get the facts right. The United States did an innocent passage in accordance with international law at about 40 miles off the Chinese coast, completely legal by all articles of UNCLOS. So you have to stop saying they're violating anything. You may not like them in China. That is international law, and the United States adhere to it. And the second issue is China does ships off of Guam.
How can you talk about international law when the United States not even a party to it?
I let you finish. I let you. Absolutely. We can talk about it. The United States is not party to the International Criminal Court, and we talk about it all the time. So that's really, that's not an argument. The second part is China operates off of Guam and Hawaii all the time. In our EEZ, when the U.S. is doing exercises, the United States never interferes with those ships, never makes runs of those ships at 150 yards. So China does actually do this, sir, and the United States doesn't respond like a petulant child. And I'm very nervous about China's having all this power, military power, and yet operating improperly. It is not respectful for the long history of Chinese behavior, professional behavior in other regards. It's disappointing, and to me, it is provocative.
I want to touch on exactly that by bringing Joseph Rosen into the conversation. Joseph, this sounds almost like a game for dominance, power, control, in particular in what's being touted as maritime borders pertaining to a particular country being China or international waters. Do you think this is a game for dominance? And if so, who currently has the upper hand?
So before that, I would say, and if I may be a bit provocative, and say that international law is irrelevant when we are in the context of great power competition because they set their own rules. Directly to answer directly to your question, I would say that no one, nor China, nor the U.S. has the upper hand in this race of dominance in Asia. Because, yes, the U.S. has an uncomparable military advantage globally. China cannot compete, although they try to bridge the gap and gain military experience through peacekeeping operations, but they're still far behind. Economically, the same situation where the U.S. leads in many economic spheres, technological, advanced technologies, and again, China is trying to bridge the gap. And China indeed invests a lot, including the cohesion between civil sector and the military in order to invest more in research and development to bridge the gap with the U.S. But no one. It's a tie game. The only thing that will dramatically change the situation within the superpower competition is reaching out to the global south. And in this context, the U.S. is, in my opinion, is losing. While many countries in the global south consider the U.S. as, I would say, unreliable and busy lecturing on democracy, China uses the global economic downturn in order to offer these countries in the global south very much needed economic financial funding. So the only way for the U.S., again, in my opinion, is to embrace a more pragmatic approach and move away from this elite group that we also saw during the G7 and reach out to countries in the global south, because that's the soft places that can change this competition entirely.
So, Professor, just in the last minute that we have, taking that one step further, simple question: could China and the US actually be headed to a war?
No, I'm all advocating for more dialogue between the two parties, but I think the defense minister from China does have a point when he said at the recent security conference in Singapore, saying that how comes every time we have an incident like this, it's always very close to the Chinese shore, whether it be in the air or on the sea. There got to be something going on here. So his advocation is that United States Navy, United States Air Force, just behave like an adult, don't get these things too close to the coastal area of China. So, it's totally unnecessary, right? If it's innocent passage, what's the point of innocent passage if you sail so close to another country? China is not like the Gulf of Sidra of Libya many years ago.
Right.
It's a major power. It's not going to tolerate behaviors like this, getting close to the shore every time.